The hunters were standing near the gate that had recently opened. A girl who was watching all of this was pondering the fact that it was unbelievable. After all, two gates had opened at the same place at once. Luckily, the school was closed, but there were still school children snooping around. Suddenly, the girl saw some strange man who started to approach them. She started telling him that it was forbidden to walk here, but when he threw off his hood, she realized that it was Hunter Jinwoo. He immediately started asking the girl when the gate opened, and she told him it was 3 days ago. This is when he realized that he was a complete fool because no one had said that the dungeon would open after he knew its location. Since it had already been 3 days, it meant that someone had entered this dungeon. He realized that it was probably with the rank of the dungeon, and he wouldn't say the level was that high. He started asking the girl if the hunters had already entered there, and she told him that it was about 2 hours ago. He started telling her to stop the exploration immediately, but the girl didn't understand why. After all, the results of the exploration showed that this was a ranked dungeon, but Jinwoo insisted and kept saying that those hunters who went in there were in danger. If they didn't hurry up, they would all die. But she didn't understand what he meant and saw Jinwoo start to go into that dungeon, telling the others to just stand there and wait. But the girl still didn't understand why he had to say all this. After all, it was possible to just explain the whole situation, but Jinwoo told her that they probably didn't have time. As soon as he went inside the dungeon, the hunters who had entered before stood in front of the big door and realized that it was the boss's room. But they didn't understand why it was closed and started thinking about what they should do, since even magic wouldn't help here. Some of the hunters suggested just leaving, but Jinwoo, who had arrived in time, began to tell them that it was a trap. The hunters were startled by his sudden appearance and started asking him questions. Jinwoo explained that he was one of the highest-ranking hunters in the dungeon and had an S rank. The hunters realized that he was an experienced and dangerous hunter. Jinwoo warned them that it was dangerous here and they should go back. He would deal with it himself. When he went to the door and tried to open it, he realized that it was locked and probably enchanted. Suddenly, a notice appeared in front of him that the doors of the Kartanon temple were locked and needed a key to open. Jinwoo took out his key but realized that something had gone wrong this time. The hunters behind him couldn't figure out how he did it since the doors were locked. A non-hunter apologized to Jinwoo and said that this place was already reserved for the raid, so he couldn't kick them out, even being S rank. Jinwoo agreed with them and said he wouldn't stop them. If they wanted to go in, they could continue. The hunters rejoiced that they were right, and suddenly Jinwoo saw a notification from the system that a key holder had entered the temple. It said that force would be used to destroy the uninvited guest, and as soon as one hunter walked a few steps, the guard who was guarding the entrance forcefully tried to hit him with his big hammer. However, Jinwoo came in time and grabbed the hunter by his armor, throwing him back. They saw before them a horrible monster standing outside the door. Jinwoo began to tell him that if they still wanted to enter, he would not restrain them, but they should listen to him carefully. They should leave this place as soon as possible, and after that, they should contact the association to report that a dual dungeon had opened. After saying these words, Jinwoo entered the large hall, and the notification system showed that the key holder had entered, and the doors slammed shut at the same moment. He stood and watched as the torches began to light up, and all the tests from last time stood in the same places. Nearby was a large statue that held the rules of this dungeon. Jinwoo realized that this was where it all started, and he had come here again. But now it was different. He realized it clearly now, and the attestations were no longer monsters. The other creatures were just puppets, and the only one in this room possessed them. Jinwoo began to look at the largest statue in this room and began to say that it was none other than him. He started to address it, saying, "Why don't you keep your mouth shut like that?" But suddenly, this large statue began to smile terribly, and the verbal smile hiding under the hood began to tell him that he had finally arrived. After all, they were already waiting. At this time, Yuri Orlov arrived at one of the airports in Japan, and all the reporters were fixated only on him. On this day, the reporters started telling him to look in their direction and started asking him questions about how he planned to block the gate. He answered them that he would make a magic circle around the gate as always, and then, when he activated the magic, they'd lock down and no one would be able to get out of there. Since it's an S-rank gate, most are skeptical of this so far, and they asked if he could make a couple of comments. He started to answer. No problem. Granted, my magic alone wouldn't be enough to maintain a barrier of that power. However, he could absorb the magical energy of the objects around him. To block the gate, he would need mana crystals to be placed all over Tokyo. He would simply activate the spell, after which the barrier would begin to absorb mana and become as strong as a wall. By doing so, he would save everyone, and they should remember that. This live broadcast was being watched from his office by the president of the association, or was he? But he was afraid to imagine what would happen if he couldn't contain the S-rank gate. Suddenly, the association president turned to his ward and started asking him how Hunter Jinwoo was doing, to which the latter replied that he was currently protecting a dungeon in the Seoul area. He held out a list of the dungeon to the association president that was available upon Ajin Guild's request, but he was afraid that there might be some disagreements with the White Tiger Hunters and Reapers Guilds because of this. It was hard for the president of the association to believe that a small guild consisting of just one person could become on par with the larger guilds. After all, it was so ridiculous that it even made one want to cry. His assistant was in complete agreement with his words, but the president wondered what they needed it for. But the underling replied that he didn't know anything. They were only asked to make sure that no one entered the territory of the gate for a week. The president of the association realized there should be no problem with that. Suddenly, the assistant's phone rang, and he asked the president of the association if he could step aside for a moment. The president replied that he could go for 2 minutes because he had an appointment, so he would go too. As soon as he picked up the phone, they started telling him that they had received an urgent message from the raid site and that their presence was required. The assistant was reminded of the school where the orcs recently appeared. At first glance, there wasn't much there, but they said that a double dungeon opened up in the hall of that school, and also Hunter Jinwoo went in there alone. Hunter Jinwoo was already in that dungeon and looked at the terrifying statue that started to rise, and 6 large stone wings appeared from it. He saw the large stone slab that had the rules of the Cartenon Temple written on it start to break in the hands of that statue. Until that moment, he had turned to the hunter who had finally come to him, but Jinwoo saw the stone slab just split open, and he began to say that it seemed that the rules that were inscribed on it originally didn't make sense. However, the creator began to answer him that it wasn't that simple at all. Now those rules really weren't needed. Jinwoo began to ask the creator why he had called him here. The creator replied that that was exactly what it was, but the hunter was interested in the fact of whether he was a monster or not. The creator answered him that he had asked his question wrong, and instead of asking who is he, it was better to ask who are you. And as soon as he clapped his stone palms together, all the statues in this room began to move. Now the final test would begin. If he could endure it, he would learn everything about himself, and that would be his parting gift. But Jinwoo started to summon his shadow soldiers, but the creator snapped his stone fingers and told him that it wouldn't work that way. After all, they were in an exam and all class skills have been blocked. After all, this test is only for him, and the creator is not interested in his loyal subjects. Jinwoo started to see a notification from the system that buying potions from the store was forbidden, and healing by leveling up the daily task was impossible. Jinwoo stood at the same spot and began to reflect on the fact that he didn't even think that the trump card he had so carefully hidden would become useless in an instant. But those statues approaching him didn't wait and began to attack him immediately. However, Jinwoo realized that the inventory he had could be used for his own purposes. He decided that he could handle it on his own. When one of the guards hit him with his large sword, Jinwoo blocked the blow and used his strength to shatter it, using the piece he held in his hands without hesitation and throwing it back at the guard's head. The guard who was standing didn't realize what had hit his head, but Jinwoo didn't wait, and at this moment, he jumped up and used his foot to strike the piece of that stone sword that was stuck in the guard's head, knocking it into the ground. However, the other guard standing nearby also immediately attacked the hunter, but Jinwoo was very fast and blocked his strike, using his grips, cutting his large weapon in half. He then jumped away from the first guard and started moving behind the back of the second guard, using the blades he had in his hands. He began to attack and stuck them into the back of the huge guard's head. But that wasn't all. The next guards, who were standing nearby, began to use their stone bows and shoot toward the hunter, but all their arrows were in vain as Jinwoo repelled them. Jinwoo saw a huge arrow piece flying in the air. He promptly propped up the arrow and kicked with maximum force, deflecting it toward the archer. The arrow crashed into the archer's head with incredible force, tearing off a piece of his stone head. Jinwoo had been waiting for this moment, as if he had only lived for this. He started dismembering all the stone guards, but the creator who was watching couldn't believe that Jinwoo had reached this level of development. He realized that Jinwoo had actually become stronger. Jinwoo, while blocking the guards' attacks, began to see more and more clearly all the movements of the statues that had been impossible to grasp before. They were strong, but he felt certain he would be able to defeat them. The creatures floating in the air and watching all of this began to tell themselves that he had really grown. However, they weren't finished yet, and suddenly Jinwoo felt that the danger had increased. The largest stone statue in the room began to stand up, and the creator told him that it was time to chant God. A little later, a few hundred kilometers away from where Jinwoo was battling with the creator, the president met with the chairman of the Japanese Association. The latter began to hold out a memorandum to him with text written on it, stating that they were giving up all the crystals from the island in favor of South Korea. However, the president did not fully understand why they wanted to do this. The president of the Japanese Association began to say that they would like to hire Jinwoo in return. At this moment, a smile appeared on the president's face, and he replied to him that unfortunately, this Jinwoo did not belong to the association. But the chairman knew that it was only through them that they could contact him and wasn't asking for them to force him to do anything. After all, he just wanted to talk. The president thought about the fact that only for that they were willing to pay such a price. It seemed that with the death of Goto Ryuji, they had no hunters left at all to hold back the S-rank gate. Considering how much Jinwoo's services cost, it wasn't a bad deal. But the president pushed the sheet back and started telling him that he would like to talk alone without interpreters. The chairman couldn't believe that the president knew Japanese, and he replied that when he was a child, his father had run a business in Japan. As soon as everyone left that room and the doors were closed, the president began to tell the chairman that if he was up to something again, he had better drop the idea at once. But the chairman didn't understand what the president was saying. The president went on to say that rumors had reached him that they were now in a strained relationship with the Blade Guild. The chairman at this point jumped up and started raising his tone at the president. This didn't stop the president, though, and he went on to say that the Blade Guild had turned out to fund the association. It wasn't hard to guess what was going on, because that's where it was originally going hand in hand with the Japanese Association. But due to the death of Goto Ryuji, who had control over all the S-rank hunters, now they are not easy to manage, and the Blade Guild is now on the verge of collapse. The rest of the guilds are busy mopping up the gates and must be having a hard time. If monsters get out of that gate that opened in the middle of Tokyo, then all the responsibility would fall on the chairman's shoulders. The president began to tell him that apparently Goto Ryuji was an outstanding hunter of their country. Although he didn't agree to this raid because of the best of intentions, it was their fault for taking control away from the Blade Guild. The chairman is responsible for splitting up the guilds and now not being able to control them. He alone is responsible for trying to cheat back then. The chairman saw that the president had placed a black box on the table. It wasn't a real black box, but the same one used by Ryuji's team. At this point, he started to get very angry and told the chairman that since they thought he wouldn't find out about it. The chairman saw the atmosphere heating up, and the president was very, very angry. He continued to talk about what to do, without even mentioning the crystals. We are talking about ordinary citizens. If they thought about what would become of them if these recordings were made public. The president was so angry that he broke the transmitter and the table that was right between them. The president said that there's some kind of heartless fate out there, and he doesn't need this. He's not going to get the whole country up in arms over one man's other intentions. After all, they can't risk their reputation and all its allies. They should thank Jinwoo for that. Meanwhile, Jinwoo fought against the huge guards, and as soon as he destroyed a few statues, others would immediately appear in their place. He realized that there was no end to them. Then he noticed a huge statue behind him that was larger than all the previous ones. He realized that he wouldn't be able to dodge it. In desperation, he used the ruler's touch skill. The statues that were chasing him began to rise into the air thanks to this technique. But before the huge statue could shoot out its eyes, those statues that were in the air melted from the force of this powerful attack. The notification system showed that his ruler's touch skill had reached its maximum level, and the ruler's power skill was now available to him. While the attack and the big statue kept getting stronger and stronger, those statues simply melted, and their powerful attack flew near Jinwoo, who managed to dodge. He realized that it was very dangerous, and if he was hit by such an attack, no skills would help him. He realized that first, he had to deal with the big guy who shoots. Jinwoo started to use the sprint skill and jumped into the air to get to that big statue. But it didn't stand still and started to lift its big foot to slam Jinwoo. As soon as there was a loud sound of that big foot slamming into the ground, the statue started to smile, thinking it had finally killed the hunter. But suddenly he started to notice that his feet were moving with a bright light in the other direction. After a powerful impact where there was smoke, Jinwoo began to appear, moving higher and higher. With all his speed, he ran toward the statue, heading toward its head, and realized that it was attacking again with its large and powerful eyes. However, at this moment, Jinwoo began to combine sprint and ruler's power to get into the blind spot. When the statue had already started firing its lasers, he was in the blind spot. Although the last strike wasn't delivered, Jinwoo realized that it was incredible as he almost didn't touch the statue. However, the effect of this combination was simply amazing, and he thought that if his skills were a little better, the result would have been even more impressive. Suddenly, the statue noticed Jinwoo standing on its shoulder, ready to deliver his crowning blow with the Chaos Blade. But as soon as the attack was over, Jinwoo realized that he had merely scratched it with a dagger that could cut through anything. He realized that since it didn't work, he would just break the statue. Jumping off the shoulder, he began to move towards the statue's face and noticed that the slit in its face was the most suitable place. As he got closer to it, he hit the crack with force with a shout, "Now break it, damn you!" The creator, still watching, knew he wouldn't be able to resist it, but Jinwoo's attack was incredible, and the huge statue began to fly aside, for he had decided to show the full power of his 103rd level. After a loud and violent impact, the statue finally lost its balance and began to fall to the ground. As soon as it fell, a loud echo resounded in the room. Jinwoo was already on Earth, and the guards that were there began to notice him and run to destroy him. But Jinwoo was unwilling to stop. He began to use his ruler's power abilities, and all the statues began to fall to the ground, as if gravity was against them. Naturally, the guards' methods were useless, and Jinwoo clenched his fist, realizing that he had become much stronger. The creator, who was watching all of this, started clapping his hands and telling him that it was commendable. Jinwoo decided that the creator should now tell him everything as promised. But the creator answered that the exam wasn't over. Had Jinwoo forgotten about him? At this moment, the emergency quest and the last test were revealed. It was the creator himself. Jinwoo began to read what the notification system was showing. His heart would stop if he couldn't overpower the opponents within a certain time, and the remaining time was 10 minutes. At that moment, just as the meter started going, Jinwoo asked him a question. Who was he? But the creator told him that he had already told him that it was a stupid question. But suddenly his mask began to crumble on his face, and he decided to answer that question, that he was the creator of the system. Outside the gate, the hunters from the association arrived. As soon as they approached the gate, the girl who was waiting for them began to tell them to come to her as soon as possible. At the head of the group was the inspector, who was pondering how they had managed to gather the 7 best hunters available at the moment so quickly. He feared, however, that it might not be enough to help Jinwoo. The hunters had only been brought in for backup. As the inspector got even closer to the gate, he began to feel a strange energy. Not realizing what it was, he began to tell the other hunters about his sensations and asked if they felt something similar, like an icy shower. The aura enveloping him was terrifying magic. He began to turn around and ask the others if any of the larger-ranked hunters were around. He was told that the Hunters Guild was holding a raid today, and there were 2 S-rank hunters participating. The inspector began to tell them to send an urgent message immediately and to get them here right away. The inspector was agitated and didn't understand what Jinwoo was doing here. But at this time, Jinwoo was about to slay the strongest monster he had ever encountered. In front of him, the creator instantly turned its wings into 6 arms. Jinwoo watched him. However, in the same second, he didn't notice the creator disappear from his sight and then suddenly attack. The creator was so fast that he threw a strong punch, making Jinwoo fly off to the side. Jinwoo crashed into the wall behind him, and the blow was so strong that he began to bleed. However, it didn't take long for the creator to strike again, immediately continuing the attack. But Jinwoo was already prepared for it and began to dodge his swift attacks. In an instant, Jinwoo was able to block all of his attacks, and the creator was very surprised by this. He realized that Jinwoo had surpassed all his expectations. At that moment, the creator struck Jinwoo's face with his large hand, soon after beginning to smile eerily. But Jinwoo didn't want to stop either. He moved furiously and punched the creator back with all his might. The impact sent the creator flying off to the side. When he stopped, he began to say that it was unbelievable. He didn't think he'd be so excited about fighting a human. The very fact that someone like that could be his opponent, he still couldn't get his head around it. The creator was very curious, but Jinwoo was already across from him, thinking about the fact that this being had called him here as soon as he reached level 101. Apparently, he had intended to take him down from the start, but Jinwoo had survived. Jinwoo started telling the creator that he had 100 questions, like why he created this system, why he chose him to be the player, and what was going on with his world. But the creator started to run toward him, saying that if he wanted to get answers so much, and if he was afraid that by killing him, he wouldn't be able to get to the truth. Jinwoo realized that he couldn't defeat him at such a short distance, so he began to run to the side. At this moment, the creator realized that he was going to attack him from afar. As soon as the explosion sounded, Jinwoo realized that the creator could use the same skills as him. Then there was no point in this plan. But the creator started to say that it didn't matter whether he would kill him or not, because his answer was already predetermined from the moment he created the entire system. But Jinwoo started to ask him questions. What was it he had created this system for, and how was he able to give him such power? The creator answered that he wasn't the one who chose him, for he didn't like him at all back then. He had only created and started the system to develop the player. Jinwoo looked at the timer and realized that he had almost no time left. The creator was already in the air and began to say that until the timer counted down the last few minutes until his death, he would fight him at full strength. As soon as the creator began to strike with the items he had picked up, Jinwoo felt something and eventually realized that he could feel again. Now he would succeed. After all, the sword, spear, blade, axe, and hammer, he could feel them, every move. The creator couldn't believe that Jinwoo dodged despite the fact that he was hitting with all his might. Yes, it also accelerated to such a speed that he didn't notice it at all. And as soon as Jinwoo cut off his stone hand, the creator realized that even though it was a fake body, he could still feel pain. At this point, the creator started frantically screaming that Jinwoo was only human, and that this was utter insolence. And now there were only 3 minutes and 45 seconds on the timer. At that moment, all the statues that were on the ground started to rise. But Jinwoo didn't stop because he wanted to make it before the timer ran out. He could defeat him right now. One big statue and a bunch of small ones were in front of him, and at their head was the creator. Jinwoo jumped into the air and activated his Lord Power skill. He struck the ground with force, causing all the guards to scatter in different directions. Jinwoo ran toward the creator and came close, starting to attack him. Little by little, he cut off the creator's stone arms, but suddenly, something hit his shoulder hard. As soon as he turned around, he saw a large guardian with a great stone shield in front of him. He realized that it was once again a creature that had once attacked him, but the timer was still running, and Jinwoo didn't want to stop. He jumped up and struck it in the head with all his strength, causing the stone guardian's head to split apart. There were about 2 minutes left to finish, but Jinwoo didn't give up. He continued to cut off the stone creator's arms, eventually pinning him to the ground. The creator told him that he had lost. He began to say that all the answers Jinwoo wanted were stored inside him. Jinwoo didn't understand what he meant, but the creator continued to say that now the choice was his. A notification appeared in front of him that the data collection process had been completed. He needed to accept or reject the information. Jinwoo thought about the fact that all the information he desired was right in front of him. He replied that he was accepting, and at that moment, a bright light appeared, and all the data was successfully transferred.